Okay, this webinar is live. It's a bit awkward because I can't see the people who have already joined us. It's always a bit strange about this way of talking into, well, without seeing people. But I'm very proud to open this first ARC talk and to welcome you. The first ARC talk will be about artistic research, empathy, and embodiment. And the ARCtalks are the result of the cooperation of the artistic research community in the North called ARC, together with the Knowledge Center Art and Society. My name is Anke Kouwmans. I am one of the professors of this Knowledge Center. That's also the reason that I have the honor to open this first talk. Really lovely that all of you signed up, and we're really proud that Kristoffer Gansing will be our first guest speaker in the ARCtalks. Together, he will talk together with two of the ARC researchers, Simona, and now I have to pronounce your name correctly, Kicurovska. I do it right? Okay, and Hermen Maat. The first ARCtalk will be moderated by Hannes Andersson. He is also a researcher of my professorship. He is one of the coordinators of the artistic research community in the North, and he has organized this first talk. So and he will also do the moderation. So I'm glad to give the floor to Hannes. Please take over.
Yes, thank you, Anke. So yes, good morning and welcome to this talk, Artistic Research, Empathy and Embodiment. It is a panel discussion we organize as Art and Society, as Anke already said, and the Artistic Research Community, ARC for short. And we are a community of artist researchers that was initiated in 2018. And it functions basically as a forum to share thoughts, which is something that we have continuously done in this kind of online format during the last very strange time that we've been through, and it has proven very fruitful. So we now want to extend this dialogue by bringing it into a broader context through activities such as this, these ARCtalks, which is a series of panels that focus on what perspectives, methods, and tactics artistic and art-based research might offer in current times of crisis, where members of our community discuss thoughts and practices together with invited guests. Today, for this first one, we are very happy to be joined by Kristoffer Gansing, to whom I will pass the word shortly. Kristoffer is an artist, activist, curator, and scholar. He is currently professor of the International Center for Knowledge in the Art of the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen. Before this, he was from 2011 to 2020, the artistic director of the Berlin Festival for Network Cultures, Transmediale. His research focuses on practice-based perspectives on knowledge in the fields of art and technology. And his recent publications include Across and Beyond, a Transmediale reader on post-digital practices, concepts, and institutions from 2017, as well as the Eternal Network published in 2020 by the Institute of Network Cultures. In this panel, he will be joined by ARC members Hermen Maat and Simona Kicurovska. Hermen is an artist researcher who, together with Karin Lansell, explores tension between embodied presence, intimacy, and alienation, privacy, and trust in post-human biotechnological entanglement with non-human others. These topics he also explores in his PhD research at the research group Art and Society of the Hansa University of Applied Sciences. Simona is a maker, researcher, teacher, and thinkerer, working in graphic design and education. She is currently developing a PhD proposal under the Consortium for Future Modes of Meaning Making at the HKU, University of the Arts, Utrecht. And after their presentations, there will be space for discussion, which you are more than welcome to join if you would like to comment. So please let us know this by announcing it in the Q&A so that we can bring you in. There you can also write questions, which we will then mediate. I hope you enjoy this talk. My name is Hannes Andersson, and I now give the word to Kristoffer. Please go ahead.
and yes, also to Anke, and thanks for your introduction, of course, and for the invitation. I'm really honored to be giving the first talk in this new series by the ARC or ARC, which funnily also has this in the north kind of add-on. And I was first thinking about the north, of course, where I'm situated in in the Nordic countries. And my talk will first, I think, go a little bit into this new center, the International Center for Knowledge in the Arts, where I'm professor since last year. And I will briefly kind of have a more, let's say, institutional introduction on that and the situation of artistic research in Denmark, in Copenhagen, where the center is located. But then I will go more into speaking about what I see as some current tendencies within artistic research. And I will try to end on a kind of more visionary, critical perspective also on artistic research as a transversal knowledge field. I wish I would also be able to kind of directly connect to empathy and embodiment as in the title of the whole session. But I know that the other presenters will go more deeply into this, and I can engage with that in the discussion. Those are also topics that in the context of the Transmediale Festival I've been engaging with, but this presentation won't go so much into my own, let's say, curatorial work or research connected to that. So let me share my screen. So I've titled this talk Tendencies, Tensions and Transversals in Artistic Research, then implicitly. But these terms will be kind of more prominent within the second part of this talk. First, I want to just mention the International Center for Knowledge in the Arts, which is physically located at the place which you see in my virtual background, the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts and the Schools of Visual Arts of the Royal Academy in Copenhagen. But as you can maybe also see on that slide from the conference there, which was the inaugural symposium of the center, it's a institutional, cross-disciplinary center, which is established actually by no less than 7 educational institutions for art in Denmark. And it was founded in October 2019, and my work started back in August last year, because after this symposium that they held at the Academy in 2019, they went on to this hiring process of a professor that should lead the further development of the center. But the whole process was delayed by, you guess what, and I started then in August. So it's pretty new. It's a place that's set up to support and also contextualize the research work undertaken in the artistic disciplines as represented by these institutions. So it cuts across fine arts, film, music, performing arts, and there's a special attention, of course, then to this kind of building of, let's say, cross-institutional and cross-disciplinary resources and methodologies for artistic research. And this, I'm not going to go into detail. It's a too detailed kind of mind map I made, but let's just say that the work of the center unfolds through a program of seminars and workshops that are on the one hand internal to the staff at the institutions, but also public lectures and symposia. And the first symposium that I curated was held back in October last year under the title of Coherence, Diversity and Networks in Artistic Research. And you can find video documentation of all that online, because it was, of course, also eventually held as an online only event. But importantly, in this visual, there is something called the KUV funds, which is the Artistic Research Funding Program for artistic development projects at all these institutions, which is given out by the Cultural Ministry in Denmark, but managed completely through this center. So it's about 1 million euro per year that we are part of giving out to the staff that undertake artistic research at these institutions. And there's an independent kind of jury of experts assessing those applications. And I mentioned that because, well, first I can mention that on our website, you can see kind of an archive of the projects that have been carried out within the program of that funding, which goes back longer than the center. It's back to 2012, actually. But there's a kind of a footnote or explanation here, and kind of sets up a little bit about these tendencies and tensions that I want to explore later, which are larger than the Danish context, but kind of relates to my reflection on it. So the situation of artistic research in Denmark is actually that it does not exist on an official kind of research policy level. What does exist is so-called artistic development work. You might be familiar with this already, but that is an activity that is acknowledged and supported as an important knowledge base for the institutions of this center. But it is primarily for artistic and pedagogical development. And as I also mentioned, it's the Ministry of Culture that is managing these institutions. It's not the Ministry of Higher Education and Science. So artistic development is not counted as research kind of proper, but as an activity that is furthering artistic knowledge that is unique to these art schools and comparable, but not the same as research. So it involves mainly the development of artistic work in a specific discipline or transdisciplinary work, and does not lead to kind of research results in the same way as you would have if you have a more formalized, for example, third cycle PhD or postdoc program for artistic research. But to confuse things a little bit, the Danish word for artistic development has been translated officially by the Culture Ministry and by the institutions as artistic research. And to confuse things even further, in recent years, there are private research funders, major ones also, that have started to offer PhD scholarships and postdoc scholarships in artistic research. And here you can kind of apply for research funding and be hosted even by one of the institutions like the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, but you then have to have a collaborating university in order to pass through the official kind of academic system. So that's formally a different artistic research than the artistic research of the artistic development model. And they kind of coexist sometimes at the academies even. And I think these are probably two movements that at some point will converge, but it's not really clear how and when. And it's one of these kind of areas of concern of the center to work with these institutions and other actors to map out the different understandings and practices of artistic development and research. And so kind of for the second part now of my presentation, I'd like to focus on some of these kind of tendencies and tensions that I see in artistic research today, but not in a way that is unique to the Danish context, but I'd rather try to zoom out to assess artistic research as a larger field against which now these different national, institutional, and also to large extent a kind of epistemological concerns and articulations play out. So I think, yeah, I would like to make a kind of a slightly polemic reduction and provocatively propose that we today have mainly to do with three kind of tendencies running through artistic research. Although this reduction serves actually the purpose to propose a kind of a synthesizing and transversal perspective. I think Hannes, or maybe even others, I don't know of you, have seen my inaugural professorship lecture that is also online from the symposium that I mentioned. I also used this argument, but I extended it from 2 to 3 tendencies, where the first 2 are kind of highly interconnected though. So we have here what I identify as a tendency of art as research. One is research as art, and one of art that may become research. So to give first a brief glimpse of each, art as research within this tendency of artistic research, that is for me kind of aligned to contemporary art and its specific forms of autonomous and aesthetic knowledge production. You can think here of artists who work with kind of extensive research-like processes in developing their artwork, and who often also present these processes as part of the work and its knowledge claims. You could take a book like Lucy Cotter's Reclaiming Artistic Research, which was published last year, maybe a good example of a survey, kind of an interview book with well-known contemporary artists in this field. Within research as art, there would be kind of an inverse related movement of non-institutional, self-organized activists and some also hybrid research practices that are being carried out by artists with sometimes goals and impacts similar to science, but that nonetheless also at the same time use artistic methods and thinking. Think about artist-run archives, alternative educational platforms, collective resources of different forms. And in art, well, I could maybe mention, you could take an example like forensic architecture, probably would actually belong to both these categories as once. Art that may become research. That's for me aligned with the more educational, practice-based research approach that treats art as a practice that may become research under certain formal criteria. I hope I have time to kind of zoom in on these just to offer a little bit more explanation. So in this art as research, research as art, I see these as tendencies that are more controversial in relation to the institutionalization of artistic research. But they are also at the same time the ones with the kind of longer history, because they are aligned with the history of the avant-garde and artists that have appropriated research long before the institutionalization of artistic research took place. In Denmark, for example, the early writings of Asger Jorn back in the 1950s already proposed autonomous artistic research institutions, but that have a connection to kind of alternative and free educational art movements that came also after, and also practices of institutional critique. And then we can think about these approaches as, of course, aligned with the rise of contemporary art. If we understand contemporary art, a bit similar to someone like Johanne Rebentisch has theorized it as a field that has been able to kind of generate its own knowledge outside of traditional academia. And in other words, art as research and research as art are tendencies of art and knowledge in contemporary art that are not based also on regarding art and knowledge as separate objects. They operate against this scientific normative production of knowledge, using the possibility instead to, art itself to generate and become a form of critical, interventive, speculative, or to use a phrase from theorist Katrin Busch, other knowledge. And it's perhaps not so surprising then that not everyone in contemporary art or in this more hybrid self-organized context are so happy about artistic research as a form of, let's say, making art more scientific in a formal and normative way. And we're seeing a lot of critical debate, and have seen, of course, a lot of critical debate about artistic research in its institutionalized forms. But there's perhaps another, often unacknowledged tendency within this kind of tendency that kind of relates to another form of institutionalization, which is that of critical aesthetic theory and cultural critique, which often then serve to lend credibility to these forms of artistic research, whether they are within kind of the center or even on the fringes of contemporary art. So that's one too many. Sorry. Doing PowerPoint, failure by PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint. No, so in the direction or understanding of artistic research as practice-based, or this idea of art that may become research, I think we find a much more affirmative approach in the relation to science. Since this direction I claim it bases itself on research traditions that are originally formulated outside of the artistic field. We have action-based research in pedagogy or other professional contexts, notions such as Donald Schoen's reflexive practitioner, tacit knowledge from Michael Polanyi, and and also the hermeneutic tradition, where you have these kind of famous interpretative cycles, which are applied to the iterative cycle of, let's say, practice and reflection. So these are kind of pragmatic and rational humanist traditions that are, I think, admittedly not always well suited to ambiguities of aesthetic form. If you think about more immanent, processual, critical, subversive, or transgressive art movements. But it has been effective to provide institutions with the categories from which to legitimize and judge artistic research, which is standardized as this kind of new later branch of practice-based research. So in formalizing an arguably long-running tradition of artists using scientific research methods, practice-based research tends to become research often for practice, that is working to develop or enhance a specific artistic discipline's methods and outcome, especially when it's operated within the idea of art as predominantly a disciplinary practice. I think this tendency is not immanent mainly to contemporary art, but rather expands into disciplines as they have been institutionalized by art schools. This is at least quite prevalent within the artistic development approach, whether it's in classical music, traditional crafts, or design research. But it can also take on much more hybrid forms within such institutional settings, depending how they have themselves developed. So you have also the lab model of art and science, where you could say also that often it is innovation that becomes a key motor for generation of knowledge, rather than, let's say, aesthetics of the contemporary. Maybe to cut to the last part of my presentation, I think there is also like perhaps a more positive side that is often unacknowledged of this institutionalization. That is that it's noticeable that artistic research in this tendency is not longer something just confined mainly to the visual arts, but have become quite pluralistic in terms of artistic disciplines, so including music, film, performing arts. And it's a development that's kind of also an effect, I guess, of this standardization of education and artistic research in the post-Bologna kind of educational landscape. And then on the basis of this development, one could make the argument that artistic research is actually part of a kind of democratization of art education on the research level. If we think about also how opaque some of these institutions have been before, with the more kind of master pupil professor school type of education. So I think one needs to kind of also acknowledge that a little bit reverse perspective, even though there are many discontents with it, and try to work kind of productively and critically with that process, rather than just lamenting the lost autonomy of art. And that leads me to the conclusion here, where I would like to suggest a perspective on artistic research, which is actually not trying to be polarizing. But remember, I talked about tendencies here, not schools or fixed approaches. So I think one should be critically aware of the strengths and weaknesses of these tendencies and make the use of the best sides of them. And in the work with the center in my professorship, I've observed how all these tendencies that I've outlined kind of coexist within the institutions even. They are not really clear-cut directions, but they kind of run through the field at large. So I think we need to kind of zoom out and look at how artistic research has become a knowledge field that is in a way bigger than the sum of its parts, a practice, and even a cultural imaginary that can be transversal and transformative, in that it's cutting across art, science, and society, and critically and creatively kind of reforming also how knowledge is being produced and disseminated. And I think this kind of shift in perception of artistic research would pay respect to how both art and research are not consensual concepts for which we can ever, reach, let's say, a definite answer to the questions of what they really are. For example, in regards to science and research, there is a whole post-positivist kind of epistemology of science, which Again, drawing actually on the writings on artistic research by Katrin Busch, that kind of already acknowledges that scientific facts are completely enmeshed with the material, enmeshed with the material conditions and even aesthetics of their production. And in art, it's interesting to note also that we are witnessing since long, I think, a crisis of the legitimization of art as art. If we look at the professional implosion of contemporary art in a way, where cultural institutions as well as individual artists often want to be anything but art and artists. I speak here about my own experience actually of the Transmediale Festival and also of transdisciplinary and self-organized art projects and collectives. So rather than taking this approach where one struggles at what artistic research really is, let's shift the focus in a way to what it does, how it operates. This is what I'm trying to do with the center, and also asking what the center can do for it in a way, and not discussing it as something fundamentally different from science that can be boiled down to this one thing, but working with the potentialities and resources within these existing tendencies. This would mean also working with artistic research as transversal knowledge in relation to the different possible roles that institutions, but also individuals can take to it. So there are so many actors today that can claim a stake within artistic research. So artists, researchers, activists, critics, theorists, politicians. And I think that's something one should try to positively acknowledge rather than letting the field becoming a kind of a caricature of what academic research looks like. But we need this open framework, which is as mutable as art and science as historically always been. Now I need to probably end, and I would do that with the call of also doing this in an autocritical, self-critical way. There's been a lot of discussion about that I'm not going to go into. I think the difference maybe with the kind of critique that is needed or is happening within the artistic research community today is that it's also coming from within the artistic research field, as if we understand it as this transversal field. I think there are a lot of things that calls for more diverse interpretations of what counts as knowledge. For example, through decolonial perspectives on knowledge, in which even research as a Western paradigm is being called into question. Or we could take a conference that's going on, I think, right now at the HKU in Utrecht on the topic of post-research, which I interpret as another kind of attempt to move beyond research as a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy and this deadlock in a way of artistic research caught in between institutionalization and autonomy. So with the transversal perspective, we can't avoid such contradictions and uneasy constellations where post and even anti-research is maybe also part of the field. So a critical question on the level of institutions and individual projects would be how to respond to these movements and what transformations they can bring to this field, which I think is still very much in flux. So thank you for listening. That's my presentation. I'll stop sharing the screen there.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I have a bunch of comments and questions, but I will do that afterwards. So, and also if people came in late, you are very welcome to place comments in the Q&A or to mention that you would like to comment in person and we can bring you in. But for now, I will just pass the word directly to Hermen. You're muted, Hermen. Sorry.
Thank you, Kristoffer, for your interesting talk. It's quite opposite of my presentation in the sense that mine is almost tries to be tangible. Wait, I will start my presentation. Hang on. So I'm currently doing a PhD under supervision of Barend van Heusden and Anke Kouwmans, with the title Embodied Involvement in Empathic Relations in Interactive Media Art, in and through the design of artworks by Karen Lancel and me. The picture you are looking at here on the right side is a work called Empathy Ecologies, which we presented 3 days before the lockdown, March 2020. And what we did is we made an installation using biofeedback from humans and plants that were transformed into a soundscape with composer Gürkalem Arikam. And we used both EEG measurements, photosynthesis, and CO2. And this created a collaborative soundscape in the space through touch of humans and plants. So these kind of setups raise a question: how do we experience our empathic relations change through technology? Here you're looking at a picture of E.G. KISS, which is part of our artistic research, Shared Senses. In performance art, based on telepresence and public space, the interaction with artists as a performer is often central. Little research has been done on performance art with interaction between participants in the public space for physical, emotional involvement and shared reflection. You're looking here at a picture at our Ars Electronica, where we invited the audience to kiss and wear EEG headset, and also bystanders to wear a headset, and together their brain data are projected real-time on the floor and also real-time transformed into a soundscape. I'm going to show you now some documentation of the work. Do you still hear me now?
I hear you, but I don't hear.
I think you don't hear me now anymore.
I hear you, but we don't hear the sound. Is the sound important?
Yeah. Can you still hear me? Yeah.
It's often that the person who watches has a lot of the same feelings than the people that really do it. The visuals in sexuality and intimacy, I think they are really quite important to create this connection and these feelings. Also ich finde es ein großes Glück und das freut mich, dass es
It was more like keys that for me energetically goes outside myself, not just to her in a omnidirectional way.
We share a moment of intimacy, but it's very public, so the tendency is to just look away.
Even wearing this thing like makes you invisible a little bit.
Especially in the end, when they were smiling at each other, I felt happiness. But it's really nice, actually, to see people kissing.
It was like two layers of a different wave frequency. It was two waves. They were in the first wave, and then it was the next wave on the people around.
I was a bit nervous in the beginning, but then with the sound, it was totally gone. For me, it was kind of interesting to hear the sound patterns changing, the imagination of a little music bed.
At the very beginning, I was like more conscious about the sound, but the very end, I didn't really feel the sound, and I was more focused on my insides.
Ich hatte das Gefühl, ich schaue weniger auf die Personen, euch, sondern als die Intimität an sich, und das finde ich sehr schön. Also, danke. Und ein großes Glück.
Ga door, ja. So this research is focused on physical empathic relations in public space, relations described as relations between human and non-human others. Do you still hear me? I'm not quite sure. I hope so.
Yes, we hear you, Hermen.
Okay. In this research, we propose an artistic form of global empathy, share your privacy, data donorship, new agency for intimacy. So I'm going to show you some interaction models in relation to art and social behavior. But first, I will give you a definition of how we, in our artistic work field, define social touch. It is an interplay of technologically mediated, embodied and imagined shared experience of interpersonal touch. This model shows for us as maker the process of interactive art and what is evoked by and for it by the participants. But actually it was developed in 1938 for understanding learning processes and educational reform. But it shows the playfulness you need to experience and reflect and conceptualize and again go through it. So that's why I'm giving you a short notions of what play and playfulness stands for. Hans Schorl defines games as having 5 attributes: freedom, as it has no goal outside itself. 2, it is no preconceived ending. And the area of play is clearly defined, and most importantly, of course, ambivalence. It's movement between a rule and chance, serious and fun, impulse and cognition, immersion and reflection. And then 5, virtuality is separate from real life and the self. And there's, I think, the exception in physical interactive art. It distinguishes itself from games in the sense that it aims to create reflection through interaction, and that it can only happen when the self or self-disclosure of participants are at stake. So you have to take a certain risk. One of the concepts that I really enjoy in understanding how you develop work and can make a more interesting installation is the concept of symbiotic interaction by Ravio Kelomees. He proposes this concept of biofeedback data as part of the whole reflection system and the interactor and participant becoming part of the artwork, opposed to previous forms of art interaction where you could either watch or maybe touch, but now you become embedded with it. What for us is missing in this model is touch, embodiment, mirror interaction, the fact that there are often multiple participants, that there is a telematic networked space, and it's specifically set for the exhibition space only. So a sort of opposite concept is sensitive media. Perhaps the media themselves become effective. We definitely insert into them many emotional functions and features as both designers and users. Do they respond to such stimuli with feelings? This is a concept developed by Anna Malinovska and Toby Miller, questions for our artistic research this raises is, how do we experience these feelings as genuine? And what is our relation to our own body if technology is more sensitive and effective than we are? If we are in symbiotic interaction, we can still reflect on this entanglement. Sensitive media make us more attached to our devices than to human others. So what are the design strategies to make an audience experience this self-reflection? So that's why I come back to the title of my research, Embodied Involvement in Empathic Relations in Interactive Media Art with Human and Non-Human Others. So the artistic trajectory for hybrid touch is urgent now. Touch is almost criminalized due to Corona. Questions to which we now formulate artistic answers. How can we orchestrate new forms of encounter through mediated touch? How can we create new forms of collaboration through mediated touch? How can we make new experience of our own body in these virtual spaces? And what is a safe and hybrid meeting space? Can we use a robot or agent to reflect on a physical experience? Can you feel together with a robot that cannot feel? So these are the models and setups that for a work called Saving Face that we made in 2015 for a connection between the Beijing Culture and Art Center in Beijing and the Venice Biennale in 2015. And it exists of a pop-up tech interface in public space, an urban screen in public space, and a host. And for the participant sides, you have the actor who is then playful and uses self-touch. On the screen, you get co-creation on the screen through a mirror interaction, and 3 are the spectators that can later participate. To deconstruct all the actions that are happening, whether they are visual or audible or touch, we made this model, an interaction model for hosted direct social touch, indirect and disrupted multisensory connections, which is published last year. On the right hand, you see a documentation picture of Saving Face setup at Connecting Cities Network in Dessau. So currently we are developing Touch My Touch based on the work Saving Face. Touch My Touch invites you for sharing an intimate experience of touch in an online public space. It will be launched by Up Projects this spring in their program This is Public Space. So it is about synchronizing touch movement by participants to co-create a collaborative new identity in an online context that experiences changes and becomes a paradox. So can I touch you online? So from these models, we try to use as an inspiration for how we design the interface. And quite often in interactive art, of course, or almost always, the interface is the artwork. So what is the flow? What kind of models do you use? How do you create these symbiotic interactions and reflections? And so we create liminal screen interactions and touch interaction research through artistic social labs and workshops, because you can never come to the right decisions at once. So we always make test situations to develop these kind of works. This is a work, Intimacy Agents. We were invited by Edgecut in New York, which had a collaboration with the New Museum of Contemporary Art, and they invited us to perform the kissing data in nowhere.com, where instead of like in Zoom, where you all are represented in squares, you are represented in what they call nonagons, nine angled bulbs, and you are free to move around. So it works more as a normal social space, and we staged our intimacy datafied in that space, and we asked participants in the online audience to add their sound of their heartbeat to this soundcape. So you had this online collaborative performance in the sound once more. On the right-hand bottom side, you see also the how a panel discussion looks, and that you still have this freedom to move around. Then I come back to all these questions that I previously already asked. And of course, you can all answer them yes, but within this context, we seem to operate from the idea that we are online almost always without a body, but we like this paradoxical situation of a mediated self and to synchronize with others with your own body again as a feedback tool almost. So yeah, these are the questions that we aim to make tangible. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing. I hope that creates even kijken. Yeah, I think we are back.
Yeah, thank you, Hermen. I will just pass directly now to Simona, and then we can talk a bit afterwards.
Hi, last but not least, my name is Simona Kicurovska. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Hermen and Kristoffer, for your presentation so far. If all goes well, you're able to see my screen right now. And hear me well, hopefully. In the following minutes, I will tell you about my research proposal. I invite you at a most precarious state into the open space of my research. I will briefly reflect on my experience so far in attempting to position designerly ways of doing research into the scientific philosophical debate at the university. I find that in my current state of mental fatigue, all theoretical knowledge seems to evaporate. Words with the weights of histories, traditions, discoveries, and discourses are now just shapes on a screen. As I return to a state of not knowing all over again, I will share with you some experiments and insights. One thing I learned in the past 1.5 to 2 years is that in the meeting between artistic research and scientific research, not a single word used is self-evident. Each word is loaded with meaning, references, and histories. As soon as I have decided to settle on one constellation, it changes the shape of my research. And then the most daunting question rears its rather uncomfortable head. Why would a graphic designer do any form of research at a university? In all honesty, I'm fatigued from struggling to find the right words, to articulate my curiosity, finding the courage to attempt it once more after having failed again. I remember once understanding from the complicated and playful writings of Jacques Derrida that failure could be the essence of communication. Maybe he said it differently or meant something else. But here again, I make you, my audience, witness to a new attempt at communicating my research. Trained as graphic designer, my positions are informed in a field which have relatively young and limited research tradition. Graphic design theory and research borrows from semiotics, aesthetics, media theory, and critical theory. The graphic design department of the HKU, University of the Arts in Utrecht, used to be part of the Faculty of Design, in close proximity to architecture, fashion design, and product design departments. A few years ago, the graphic design department got separated from design, also in a very physical sense, in a different building, to become part of the new School of Media, closer to audiovisual design and interactive technology. Within the traditions of research at the university, I'm faced with an additional challenge of positioning my research. The University of Humanistics in Utrecht describes artistic research as similar to sensory, ethnographic, arts-based and action research, but also deviates from these approaches, partly due to the use of a variety of mediums. The creative methods I apply in my research belong to yet another, adjacent framework, that of design research, specifically research through design. The art academy curricula educate towards socially responsible practices that intentionally engage social issues and recognize the consequences of decisions and actions. Graphic design by its very nature affects people, and a socially responsible practice requires an attitude that emphasizes needs and experience over concerns of form and aesthetic. Viewing graphic design as image-making practice only presents a problem. Contemporary knowledge exceeds the capacity of visual representation, as I will show later on. Media archaeology is a field that attempts to understand new and emerging media through close examination of the past, and especially through critical scrutiny of dominant progressivist narratives. This approach helps me address questions as, how can I be critical as a maker towards the media I use, as the media that are dominant are rarely the only solution? Etienne Jules Marais was a French scientist, physiologist, and chronophotographer. His area of specialty was movement. He wanted to capture life in movement. Before the invention of the camera, using the graphic method, Marais had effectively found a way to make phenomena he was studying trace themselves. By considering life processes as mechanical processes, this meant treating the body as an animate machine, the laws of mechanics could be applied to bodies. He built instruments, machines, to capture muscle movements, and this led to the study of human and animal locomotion. His studies of men walking and running were carried out with a device, an autograph, to record the number, length, and frequency of steps taken by a person walking. Marais had made some of the earliest tracings of fatigue. This led to studies of human labor that influenced in his time and after his death the organization of work. Studies that followed subjects engaged in simple, repetitive, and often artificial movements set the stage for development in the science of labor. Defining optimum productivity led to general laws for the scientific organization of work. Engineering the human element and dividing work into the most fundamental elements possible led to building models for increasing the efficiency of the workman. Marais did not foresee the extent to which his method would be instrumental in the drive for the uniformity and standardization of work on the worker. Nor could he have anticipated that his investigation of human movement would one day be applied to the creation of a machine that would replace the humans he studied. Robots carry out the monotonous, repetitive gestures once performed by men and women. 1 century later, efficiency experts and ergonomists concentrate on mental, not physical fatigue. The love affair with the machine that began with the joyful discovery that the function of both animate and inanimate nature could be explained by laws of theoretical mechanics has resulted in creating machines to feed a body. But a screen is often in closest proximity to our bodies. An interface is bearing witness. An optic fiber is the carrier of our most intimate connections. This relationship is at the basis of my research, one changing right now as the algorithm shows us what it thinks we want to see, as if in a strange kind of mirror that has become the new space of design. Opting out cannot be the only available critical strategy. Today, lack of collective responsibility for our planet is a threat to human survival. The world is increasingly more algorithmic as the tools and technologies used keep advancing rapidly. I'm looking for a way to regain confidence and freedom, and this project explores strategies for a socially response-able design practice. Resisting if, then, true, false, 0-1 rhetoric, I want to engage with the world in nuanced and situated ways. In a computational system, every instruction must be explicit and no subjective experience can be coded in. Algorithmic thinking is about developing step-by-step processes to solve problems so that tasks can be automated and replicable by computers. An algorithm is a set of rules to be followed. In this way, algorithmic thinking imposes constraints on the world that are then assimilated and normalized within society as a whole. At the basis of computational thinking is mathesis, universal science based on mathematics, which presumes the code is self-identical and unavailable to critical interrogation, and everything else is reduced to data and its equivalent.
Then, in June 2020, came GPT-3 that supercharged this idea, and among many incredible examples, it could generate website layouts from a written description. However, no one said that these neural networks can only deal with text information. And, sure enough, a few months later, scientists at OpenAI thought that if we can complete text sentences, why not try to complete images too? They called this project Imagegpt, and the problem statement was simple. We give it an incomplete image and we ask the AI to fill in the missing pixels. It could identify that the cat here likely holds a piece of paper and finish the picture accordingly, and even understood that if we have a droplet here and we see just a portion of the ripples, then this means a splash must be filled in. And now, right in January 2021, just 7 months after the release of GPT-3, here is their new mind-blowing technique that explores the connection between text and images. But finishing images already kind of works, so what new thing can it do? In just a few moments, you will see that the more appropriate question would be, what can't it do? For now, well, it creates images from our written text captions, and you will see in a moment how monumental of a challenge that is. The name of this technique is a mix of Salvador Dalí and Pixar's WALL-E. So, please meet Dolly. And now, let's see it through an example. For neural network-based learning methods, it is easy to recognize that this text says OpenAI and what a storefront is. Images of both of these exist in abundance. Understanding that is simple. However, generating a storefront that says OpenAI is quite a challenge. Is it really possible that it can do that? Well, let's try it. Look, it works! Wow! Now, of course, if you look here, you immediately see that it is by no means perfect, but let's marvel at the fact that we can get all kinds of 2D and 3D texts, look at the storefronts from different orientations, and it can...
I hope this gives enough of an insight that leads me to pose the question, as computing and media merge, will my design practice in the near future be contained in algorithms? Engagement with the world in a responsible way is the only remaining option. The focus of my research is a way of inhabiting a problem rather than analyzing it, to move criticism and critique towards an embodied criticality. The role of the prototype in creative research is described as structured explorations. Prototypes open up spaces for experimentation, can be used to experience a possible situation, are a way to connect abstract theories to experience, or are a carrier for a discussion. Prototypes force the researcher to confront or test a theory, evoke discussion and reflection, and possibly change the world. How to understand an algorithm? Through the body. As a maker, I don't truly know anything before I let ideas pass through my body. I don't truly understand an idea or concept before attempting a translation through a movement. I haven't truly made something my own before applying it to my reality. Before truly making, I'm merely referencing others, pointing towards someone or something else's knowing. In this prototype, I follow a set of instructions as a series of executable steps. Remember at this point the graphic method of Maat, as I'm abstracting an action I perform daily, touching screens. If I can trace or graph these repetitive gestures, where in my body does fatigue set in? How does the body mediate the work and generate forms of knowledge that are extra-linguistic? Machine learning algorithms build a model based on sample data, known as training data, in order to make predictions of decisions without being explicitly programmed to do so. In terms of our bodies, strength training and resistance training involve the performance of physical exercises which are designed to improve strength and endurance. In this case, an edited transcript of the language used by instructors during group exercise video is offered as an attempt to entangle the multiple meanings of training.
This will enhance your technique. What technique? Down. Up. And up. Oh ja, dan krijg je toch een soort ballet. Kick and tap. What do we kick and tap? We have two moves. Side. Front. Land. What is land? I would say land is lie down. One, two, land wide. What is one land wide? One more. Freeze. I hear the clock ticking. It's that little cat.
To my surprise, a performance. Designers are at the forefront, embracing new technologies, not only to maintain the labor market. Clearly, we can program machines to do that. Designers embrace new tools in the creative process that are already available to the general public. What does a response-able design practice of the near future look like? As graphic designers anticipate and embrace machine learning as a tool to create, what are we supposed to do when most of our paid work can be executed by algorithms that we programmed? As maker, researcher, and educator, I now ask, what new scenarios for political imagination and responsibility can we develop to prepare designers as response-able citizens of the future? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Simona, for this presentation. Should we have a 5-minute break maybe before we continue to the discussion? Yeah, then yes, so now it is, yeah, let's say we reconvene at 1:15. Is that good? Yeah. So hello, welcome back. I give a few minutes for my panelists to arrive. I hear that we're having some technical problems in terms of visibility. Is that true? Simona, can you see me?
I can't see you. I can hear you, but I can't see you.
That is unfortunate for sure.
I see your image now, but not your video.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Then I guess I just have to live with that for now.
Do we still invite people to join in the panel?
People are invited to join in the panel if they want to.
And you will add them by video, right?
Yes, if they announce that they want to join, definitely.
Yes. Okay.
Is it only me that you do not see, or you also do not see the rest of the people?
I see the rest. I see Kristoffer and I see Hermen.
Okay. Good. I'll post that then.
Okay. Well, I guess I just have to live with that. And my first question, I think, was maybe primarily directed towards Kristoffer, but also to all of you around this tension of fitting embodied research practices into like a more established research context, and how that seems to have a problem with language, and also generates this tension of many more experimental artistic approaches not wanting to conform to this traditional scientifically established ways of doing things. And then my question is, like, can that tension perhaps be useful? And because I'm like you said, Kristoffer, in your presentation, I'd like to try to work with these tensions, and I would like to ask to you and to the room, is there a benefit to formalize this into a more established research context, or is there a value in maintaining it in the way that it is, that allows for more exploration and embodied criticality, maybe, like you said, Simona?
You want me to start, maybe? Although I think that everybody is equally or more qualified to answer this than me. It's a really good question, because I mean, some of the points that I got to at the end of my talk, I could just as well, I guess, have brought in the question of embodiment as kind of a challenge within research environments and artistic research. I think that in a way this whole question about embodiment, I was thinking about it at the end also of Simona's talk, when you said, as a maker, I don't really understand an idea or concept before I passed it through my body. It kind of highlights also a difference, because it's not like embodiment is not part of research, as one doesn't do physical prototyping and so forth. But there is I guess, a difference in using it as a kind of creative methodology also of knowledge creation. So the difference here could be also that this type of embodiment practice does not claim, universal validity by quantifying it to many users necessarily. I mean, the design process can include that, but also the aesthetic and the experiential is allowed to also come into the foreground. And I think this is important, and I think there's like a performative aspect to the kind of projects that you also presented, which sets knowledge in motion, which I think is interesting. But maybe you others also care to comment on that. I know I didn't get to the part about if it can also exist with outside, if there's a value to that, but maybe you can also answer this. Simona and Hermen.
No, Hermen, maybe you want to add this?
Well, I think it's also a process of going through a certain discomfort, and then, yeah, could you call it almost, and what I was describing, like how do you invite people to take a risk to participate, and then to create this reflective experience. So, and then do this again and again, or in different contexts, and find out by doing it, like Simona was also saying, like, okay, you have to allow a certain amount of mistakes, or make them purposefully to become part of the research. So, and sometimes you have to also in that process be willing to not know everything. And yeah, that's what I can say so far. But how can you integrate that again into in which box it fits within academic research is a next step again.
But do you personally think it should? Do you think it should fit within academic research?
Maybe not necessarily. It can create knowledge on how we encounter each other through unstable and new media, and it changes who we are and how we are among each other. Definitely, that's why I want to research it, and why I think it's interesting to use this almost a body as an interface, because it gives you a different form of reflection, although you can also not really totally trust that immediately, but because you know these kind of feelings can be manipulated as well. But yeah, it is an exchange, I think, of am I too vague now?
No, not necessarily, I think. Yeah, sorry for my strange appearance here. I heard that my screen was not working, so I joined from a secondary computer. Yeah. Simona, what do you think?
Well, I think the process I just showed, actually, I spoke from the experience of being right in the middle of it, because I feel quite comfortable sharing my research in the setting of an artistic research community, because when we say certain things, we all think we know what we're referring to, but then at the same time, I visit lectures at the university, and then I present the same research. And as I said, I have to explain every single word the way we understand it in the arts. But I do think that it's a necessary effort. Why not? I allow different perspectives, philosophy, science, inform and influence me and my work. And why not allow for maybe not as had the sort of rhetoric of if then true false, the quantified and the qualified and the measure. People already know this and do this, so it's really about maybe opening up new dimensions and new exchanges. Yeah, and whether that guarantees that it's gonna do something else, I don't know, but it could inspire to look at each other and the world in a different way, and not to get all universal, but this the labor that I'm so fatigued from now, I think it's worth it. I think it's
yeah. No, it gives an interesting kind of feedback then, but then. Yeah, I think it's funny that you say that I think the attitude is maybe the same, that as an artist you want to look for where is the friction and how can you enhance it, and then by enhancing it research it, and then maybe that comes from an almost tangible wish, and then you can dissect it again and think about it and write about it. So that helps for sure. But I think it's almost like a collaborative process. Yeah. For me, at least.
I think Anke wants to comment on this.
Yes, I will try. As you know, I'm not an expert in digital culture. But the funny thing is that I'm all the time, since a year, I'm all the time confronted with kinds of digital culture research that is sometimes a bit above my head, you could say it like that. But maybe that also gives me a kind of different way of listening to it and a different perspective. And what I don't find strange is that the word embodiment is worked out when it comes to digital culture. And what I saw in both presentations is that to bring in the body. And you could ask, why bringing in the body? And I think that digital culture and its algorithms and also the working in research, which asks a lot of conceptualizations, words that refer to words. We all know how Flusser talked about textolatry. And I think that also algorithms are in a certain way a kind of textolatry. All can be locked up and there is no outside anymore. And what I really find interesting, and I'm not sure if it is part of artistic research, but I'm sure that it is something, well, I'm not sure if it's only part of artistic research, but it is definitely one of the essential things of artistic research, is the constantly looking for how reality can break in, and reality as the thing that cannot be symbolized immediately. So I think artists need something new that puzzles. They need this kind of uncertainty. They need the thing that is out of the language, symbols, text, etc. And that I find really interesting in both the presentations of today. We want and the looking for unpredictability, for the hunger for not knowing, because that sometimes seems the only way of getting somewhere else. We don't want to be locked up. That's what I find interesting, and I always love the concept that psychoanalysis has for that is le réel. I think we're looking for le réel, which we cannot control, and but we need to control it bit by bit. So that was my, well, not a question, it was my response. Now I found that really interesting. Oh yeah, okay. Not a question, I'm sorry. Maybe the question is, do you agree with me?
Does anybody wish to react to this?
Well, I always find that Anke can do things with words that when I hear them back, I'm thinking, oh, I wish I could say it like that. So thank you for that.
I bet English, but okay.
But I do actually want to repeat the question that Hannes asked, how this, in your opinion, can find a place or should it find a place in the scientific or the university or what we're all trying to do.
You're asking me this question.
Well, we had to answer it from Hannes.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's not a direct answer to your question, but I very much like this book of Danny Butt, Artistic Research in the Future Academy, because what he does is criticizing the academia of this moment as being neoliberal institutions. And he proposes artistic research as being a critique on the way institutions have become neoliberal institutions. And for me, that's one of the reasons that I really love to bring artistic research into the university. I'm always very much into subversive practices, and well, would be great if artistic research could, yeah, be the luis in the pels. How you translate that?
The breaking iron of making things tangible, also then.
Yeah, but I don't think that I don't think it's not happening at all, and artistic research can finally have that role. I think it's also happening within academia. So I think we should find our partners. For example, well, we all know Tim Ingold and his way of criticizing Qualquot, for example, and his also his way of referring to artistic research as, well, he said that artistic research can be the better anthropologist, and then he all brings in this kind of things that are kind of competing the neoliberal way of academia, like being generous, being critical, being comparative, being open-ended, and also acknowledging, also let reality break in. Maybe his how he talks about being generous means that you don't use things or you don't use the world to come into your, but you also are open for how it can transform you. Is that an answer, Hannes, for now?
I think that, yeah, it's definitely an answer. Kristoffer wanted to comment.
Yeah, I just want to comment a bit, I mean, on this aspect of the neoliberal. I mean, I very much like that book by Danny Butt also. But what we've seen, especially in the debate in Scandinavia, is that artistic research has become the symbol of the neoliberal art education, for not within the universities so much, but within the art schools. It has become this kind of symbol of how the university, neoliberal university structure invades the art schools with its demands for peer review, productivity, quality assessment, and so on. And this was a little bit what I was trying to address also implicitly in my talk. So there is that side to it too. And maybe another also perspective one can look to here is the Canadian context of research creation. There's really good work by a scholar called Natalie Loveless, or Natalie something, maybe not Loveless. Anyway, she's describing this a little bit more hybrid constellation, which is not so aware of these divisions that I've become more aware of as I started to work also like within the political setting of the art academy vis-a-vis the university, which is quite distinct, I would say, still in the Danish context. So I just want to bring that dimension to it, that it's all, we want to have this development, but there are these structural divides also that play into really the nitty-gritty of the design of how this is to come about. The artistic research would be more integrated in the university or vice versa. It's it's almost an artistic research project in itself, could be. I mean, even you see artistic research being occupied with these questions.
I think it makes sense also that, I mean, that the field does occupy itself with this question, because if artists then inherently uses other means of exploring than other fields, even if there, of course, there's a lot of overlap, and I don't mean to put any boundaries specifically against other academic practice, but maybe that also requires other forms of language and ways of communicating that can that has a possibility to transmit that process. So that maybe before artistic research or art-based research or practice-based research or research creation can make statements, maybe it's required to develop some sort of shared languages and means for doing so. Or what do you think of this? Anke?
Yeah, I think what is an important contribution of artistic research towards academia is artistic research being practice-based. And I think the word practice has to be defined. Practice can mean a lot. It can mean artistic practice, it can mean social practice, but in a way, it doesn't matter if it is artistic practice or it is the social practice. In both senses, it means that something which is out of knowledge and out of language is the kind of starting point for the incentive for doing your research. And I remember that one of the people doing a PhD in my research group, that she had to talk about her question, and that her question came from practice, came from what she experienced. And but that was really strange. She was really asked to reformulate her question, but then embed it in articles. So the question should come from other theory and not come from practice. And of course, they have to work together. Of course, articles and knowledge, which is already there, should be embedded in your research. But it's really interesting notion that, and in that sense, because, well, I don't know how it is in Sweden and Denmark, but in the Netherlands, we have the University of Science and the University of Applied Science. And the University of Applied Science, sometimes people say, well, art should be part of the University of Science. It is more academia. And others say, no, it should be part of the University of Applied Science. And in a beautiful way, we're part of both. We are, in that sense, well, I don't know if you should call it applied, but we're funded in practices.
Is that, yeah, I think that seems like a similar separation that happens in Denmark, right? From what I understand from your presentation. But maybe this can be both, right? It can also be an asset to exist outside of this. That's kind of what I meant with my question. I think that maybe it's an asset to exist outside of what is generally considered as research proper, as Kristoffer said, and not because it cannot produce knowledge in the same way, but because maybe it allows for certain freedoms in how it comes to those points.
Yeah, for me, it's also a bit strange, because now I'm also starting to learn how to deal with data collection and quantitative data and qualitative data. And what Anke is saying in a way surprises me a bit, that especially in academia, it seems that the data should produce the new insights and the new questions. So if you cannot see the data or the qualitative data that you have from an experience as something raising a question, then yeah, you have to argue it. You have to present these data maybe then in their format, which we are not used to. That's maybe then the thing that is happening. So it is maybe then a cultural thing in the end, or maybe Kristoffer can answer that better.
I'm not sure, but I think that actually, artistic research that deals with data has a huge kind of contribution to make, because what I see, for example, within the field of so-called digital humanities often horrifies me in the way that, data is taken more or less at face value, or, big data procedures are applied in a quite naive way. It's not that it might still be technically refined, but I think what really artistic research can contribute is this perspective of tangibility and of really kind of understanding why the representational also and aesthetic domains of the data, that it is not only that it's not neutral, but the way that it shapes the way we think and behave. And I really would like to see more work on that. Of course, a lot of work has been done already in digital culture, and Simona also mentioned digital literacy, algorithmic literacy. more interest in this, like, let's say, not only representational side of working with data is, I think, a crucial contribution of artistic research. Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly. I have an audience question here from Katie. Also, Katie, if you want to be brought in to do this live, that's very possible. Otherwise, I will just mediate it for you. Katie asks, any comments on if artists had a universal basic income to construct such investigations without being subservient to the neoliberal categorization of effect, etc., by academia and such? Does this research need to happen via universities as we know them? Does anybody wish to react to this comment?
I can say something. I think it's a beautiful question, and it's a very valid question. And I can actually answer very personally. One thing I say very often is that I would do what I do even if I don't get paid for it, but I have to function in this world as it is. So I think everything that I try to do is sort of find my way to navigate in between the systems as a sort of a dance continually. And I say it playfully, of course, because I'm also an idealist, but I do think that, it's problematic. I forget the second part of the question. Can you repeat it for me?
If such research needs to happen via universities as we know them.
I don't think it needs to, but sometimes out of very practical, you follow where the funding is. You have to. Otherwise, it's also where the networks are. It's also where the exchanges are. It's actually quite difficult to find the time as a freelancer or to actually find all your networks and be present and participate and invest all that you have. It's quite a luxurious position to be able to invest all your free time. And it shouldn't feel like it's a hobby that you do in your free time after you've done everything else to support your life, to support yourself.
No, certainly, but then that's also where the institution can be useful, right? Both politically and methodologically, constructively, because it also provides a framework for collecting like various forms of practices that you might draw a circle around and say that this is a thing. This is a way of doing things that has a value in knowledge production, and it's very hard to do that outside of the institutional context somehow, I think, personally.
Can I say something about that? It's really intriguing, because I think that by creating the artistic research community, I think we tried to be outside of institutions and at the same time be connected with them. I think that's, well, let's say that's our search. That's what we try to do. That's also what I try to do. And so that's also the reason I said I don't want to, the artistic research community is not mine. It's not part of my professorship, because the moment it becomes part of my professorship, it becomes part of this whole institution. And now you are not your own, but I can facilitate and I can be offering research possibilities, make connections, etc. So, but that is something we are working on that now. So it strangely feels the kind of answer I have never looked upon that, but now Katie is asking. I think that's what we try to do, and we're open. And artistic research is what we share, and we are. It's not hobbying, because it has this idealistic. We also feel that it's a kind of side where something is happening over there, and we need to work together on that. So maybe even to become a kind of counter institution or counter force towards the big institutions.
If I can add just to that, that is really good to hear, because in a way that is the transversal approach that I was kind of advocating, that puts you not so much into these very formalized artistic research settings, but I would just, because towards the end of that question that we got, also in relation to the outsides of artistic research and so on, I think it really makes sense to advocate more artistic research in these times that we're in, because Simona mentioned also like access to funding, to some safe conditions and so on, but especially in this also in the moment we're in now culturally with the COVID-19 crisis and the whole crisis of cultural life, like finding a sustainable way to uphold and develop your practice. I mean, I mentioned these artistic development activities at these institutions of the center. That was originally also formed, you know, also to get teachers away from only having to teach, but being able to also have something equivalent to research to focus and develop their practice outside of, you know, also the event culture that they would also usually be tied up in. And now we find on a massive scale that type of, you know, demand for concept production and performance is in a crisis in itself, and then artistic research becomes a really attractive actually arena in order to develop more long-term artistic practices. And I think this has actually a political purchase in this moment that should be pushed more for.
I completely agree with that, and I also think that the field of artists in general and artistic researchers are very used to dealing with uncertain and changing conditions, which is something that maybe our political structures and institutional frameworks are not so equipped to deal with, because it's often assumed that things have some sort of a linear development, and it rests on these pillars of assumptions that doesn't change. And then I think something we see now very much in this time is that just all of our assumptions about the world they are changing. They became different, and I think that in this maybe this more process-oriented practices that angle themselves towards uncertainty without assuming what they should do might be very useful as ways of dealing with this in these times. And yeah, maybe I think that there should be, I don't know exactly how that, because it becomes problematic, right? To formalize processes that doesn't envision their own outcome, but I think it might be very necessary, also politically. If you have any thoughts on this? No thoughts on this.
I totally agree with you, Hannes, and I'm really glad that you bring it up. And well, it's not for, well, we did a project on not knowing, and we all acknowledge, the people from the artistic research community, the importance of embracing uncertainty. And I think we very well understand that this artistic research community came into being the moment that Corona came into being. So we haven't yet reflected on that, but it's really interesting that was, I think before that we already tried to work together, and we, because we felt that artistic research is a kind of core activity. But the interesting thing is that we had some meetings, but we really came into being the moment that we only could be digital together. And I remember the first time that we all came together, I think it was like 10 or 12 artists who were all isolated for some time. And then we came together online, and well, if it is about how realness or how reality can come into a digital environment, well, that was the moment that it happened. We were very honest and authentic, and well, this is now the first the first ARCtalk is a kind of result of that community that came into being. So I'm glad you brought it up.
And we have Elisabetta Husaro has raised her hand, so I will bring her in now. If we see her. Hi, Elisabetta. You do not hear us here. Okay, I guess we'll leave it for the moment.
Did she mute herself, or can you unmute her? She is muted. Ah, now she's unmuted.
Fine, okay. Hi, sorry, little moment of checking the technical aspects. And really felt like to highlight this aspect of like dealing with uncertainty of the arts, and the fact that actually our society is based mostly on prediction. Like who does the best predictions is the one who does the money, and like Facebook and algorithm are based on prediction. So the model is like the best I can predict you, the best consumer you can become, or like data used as a way of erasing freedom somehow. So I think like this aspect is extremely important in the arts, and then how this can intertwine with the idea of forming communities, because somehow prediction is also related to individualization. And then it's critical for me, like 3 elements of like we need to be predicted as individual, but as the sameness. Each single individual is the same as much as is a predictable being. And the arts is like opposing these terms of like each individual is unique. And because of that, it's possible to make a alternative and counter movement that's a collective. But then I think sometimes it's very hard like to really feel this community or collectivity of such differences. So this is, I think, the biggest struggle in artistic environments, that often like are artists, let's say, and researcher a bit, I mean, artists themselves sometimes looks a bit isolated or like separated, and creative some sort of collective awareness. It's really, I think, the way maybe of going. I don't know, I really felt just like to address these topics, and because I feel them very close to me.
Yeah, personally, I completely agree, and I think maybe that's also like a very big political question of this time, right? How can we be collective and do something together while still leaving room for the freedom to do what we do and be who we are? Does anybody else?
Yeah, well, what I would like to add is often we think of these outcomes as maybe something that gives a ground for innovation or something, but I think within the art world, it should not necessarily immediately have a purpose. It can stay before that, and that's also why you make art. It stays in this reflective zone, and maybe then others develop from the vision that you make something that is more practical and tangible. And what Elisabeth is almost describing gives a cynic feeling of that these possibilities are sort of swiped away by the datification of everything that we do and think, and that this liberty of presenting maybe mistakes or doing things that are outside of these borders becomes more and more difficult because of these algorithms that predict almost how you should behave. That's maybe what you're also saying. Am I right? Or
actually, I think it's double or twofold. Like on one side, there is this necessity of being useful to society that goes against like what you're saying, and I really support, is like there should be an area that's autonomous or like about reflection, and other people can react on it. So in this free field, but then like for research in general, you need to be useful for the system that's already the way it is. somehow. And so it's a very delicate balance between like making something that might be meaningful and acknowledging that that might be far in the future. And on the other side, yeah, I mean, it's like actually algorithms are erasing the meaning itself of mistakes. It's like just information for usage, and that's critical probably of like how to consider a mistake maybe in our society. What's wrong, what's right, or what's to be mistaken. And I think that might be a question maybe for us.
If I may try to intervene in that, I think, you know, the process in a way of datafication, it's almost an ontological problem. It's like, you know, whatever we do, even if we're here having this seminar on Zoom, it's being evaluated as something else, as data points that can be extracted and used in other contexts. We know that, right? You know, some of the counter strategies that I see, for example, now also within artistic research, I think is also about an acknowledgement that we are already in a kind of post-autonomous phase of art. And I see a lot of projects, for example, within this artistic development program that I mentioned only at the different institutions, like, for example, within performing arts, that people want to break away. They want researchers that work with projects that break away from the traditional hierarchical role of the director and the ensemble and so on, and try to form these collectives that have a much more fluid process of cooperating in creating something like a stage play. And of course, we see that happening within digital cultures since years. I mean, like the projects that Hermen is talking about is much more about a co-creative kind of situation than just an artwork that is being kind of experienced and produced in a traditional way. So I think that there are a lot of kind of counter movements within the kind of practices that we are considering here that break this kind of classic idea of the individual artist also. So yeah, just like to bring that to the table as a reflection that this is not the only way, you know.
No, certainly, but I think it also ties into what you said, Kristoffer, about that like art process that can become research, and then when does that transition happen, and what do you do with it when it becomes research, right? How do you then deal with it? So if it is an art practice that is autonomous and it does what it does, but then when it finds something, when it becomes research, how do you act from there? Where do you bring it?
Many questions that we could develop out of that, which we don't have time for, I think. But it's a good question.
Oh yeah, we're almost out of time.
I can only say that it's something that at the moment is happening within the interrelational art practice master from the Frank Moore Institute. People come in with their practices, and we just work on kind of re-articulating those practices as being research practices. So sometimes there is research already in the practice, or the practice can very easily be re-articulated as being a research practice. And the thing you do is that you look upon them as ways of maybe not finding knowledge, but let's see, it circles around knowledge and coming to understand and know. And it can even question what knowing is, because I think that's what we have to do as well.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any last comments that people want to make now before we finish today's sessions? Okay, then I would just like to comment that I think, yeah, thank you so much for participating and attending, everyone who has been here. And thank you very much, Kristoffer, for joining us. Yeah, this is the first of this, the first time we meet in this format. So we're experimenting with it, but it would be, I think, in general, very interesting to have some continued dialogue with you and your institution, and this, yeah, to continue these dialogical activities, I think. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. So yeah, thanks everyone. And this one, I recorded this, so it will also be available online.
Yes,
Okay.
and please, audience, respond also to the to this first ARCtalk, because we, based on your responses, we can elaborate it and make it even better. And thanks, Kristoffer Gansing, for being our first guest. And I hope that we can continue to talk together, because, well, for us, it was really inspiring to have you with us. Thank you.
So much. I enjoyed the conversation a lot as well. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Super. Thank you. Well, everyone, nice day.
Okay. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Soon.